Okay. So my family, in the Great Migration of the Ojibwe, when we had a prophecy that Ogig Wanabeg Solomon Wati and Algonquin Midway Elder will share a little bit. You saw it a little bit in the video, but you might have forgotten it, so they're going to talk a little bit more about it. But before the European immigrants came, and I'll use that term, because I guess not all immigrants are equal. I'm going to do stand-up too. So before they came, we had some people come and visit with us and say, hey, you better move west because otherwise the remaining of what you have will be lost. So go west and try to hide it up as much as you can and keep moving west because they're going to come into this land with two faces. Either they're going to be your brother or they're going to be taking everything. And it's tough to tell when someone's, filled with brotherly love or greed. They both have a smile. And so it's a challenge. And my family, a portion of it, ended up in the very heart of Turtle Island. Now, North America is shaped like a dang turtle. Alaska is a big hand, and Quebec is another hand, and you got 2 feet down there with Baja California and with Florida, and you got a tail right there that you call Mexico. And, they don't show you it right. They kind of like flatten it out. But how it actually looks is it even extends upward like a head. Up in Yellowknife in Northwest Territories where the Denetah, the Dene, who they're a southern family trapped by an invisible line, the government calls the Navajo. Those who are thieves, they're actually Dene. And our family ended up, a portion of them, during the migration of the European into the Dakota Territories in a place called Turtle Mountain. It's not Turtle Mountains, it's Turtle Mountain. It was seen as like a hump in the middle of the back of the turtle, right at the center. Currently, if you look on a map, you'll see a big, interesting green circle right in the middle, and there's a border between it. And that was Turtle Mountain. And yeah, we won't go into that too further. But so my family's there, and also the Jair Peltier family. And many have heard of a gentleman named Leonard Peltier, who's incarcerated and is very well known in tribal circles. This is a relation of his. And our families are congregated with about 5 other tribal groups within the Turtle Mountain Indian Reservation. Remember, reservations are not nations. They are places they stuck families that they never lived in prior. They passed through. Maybe they hunted there periodically. But they didn't have what it took to sustain 1 generation, let alone 7. We were given promises of plows and cows, and the plows and cows were never provided. And then we were told when we were hungry, you can eat grass. And these are things no one talks about. And so at Turtle Mountain Indian Reservation, we have had the distinct privilege of watching our youth since '78 go 1 degree more, until we produced a young man named Jair Peltier. And Jair Peltier is currently running for chairman at the Turtle Mountain Indian Reservation, and he needs our support. He believes that language should be preserved. He believes that families should be united and that every child has the right to the national identity of their parent. Consider that profoundly as you marry people from separate states and you're able to call your child Canadian or American. And in our communities, we must seek back to an agency that in its mere existence is a violation of international law and a violation of provisions under the 1948 Geneva Convention rules on genocide, where an agency will tell a mother and father if their child is enough to be called the same as their family. I know I've certainly experienced it as well, and I am my father's son. And so I want to welcome Jair Peltier. We're going to start with just a little video that kind of talks about where he's going. And then the third thing that he cares about is that our people can be united just like yours. We can move between our communities and be enough to be in our communities, whereas currently that's not the case. If we go from the United States to Canada, we're not Indian anymore. And yet, our families are on reservations in Canada. If they come from Canada to the United States, they're not Indian anymore. And so they lack rights. The right to be in your nation, which is your family. And we believe that we should be able to live side by side as equals, taking nothing from each other. But we know, as LDS, that we're going to go a step further eventually, where we're one nation of spirit people. Because we're all here for the same reason, and we're all going to the same place, but 1 degree at a time. And so I'm going to play this clip, and then we'll welcome him in. And he will, I'm sure, explain his history, but this young man has taken it upon himself to move and participate in programs in Washington, D.C. I even went and visited him when he was in Switzerland, and he went and was part of the UN conventions there, representing his family and our nation. And so we're very, very, very proud of him.
Bonjour Anine, Jair Peltier Indishnakas, Makwadu Demnindao, Makanakwaju Nunjaba. My name is Jair Peltier of the Bear Clan in the Anishinaabe, and Turtle Mountain is my homeland. Years ago, when I was an undergraduate at Turtle Mountain Community College, I took a class on Turtle Mountain history. And it was in this class that for the first time I learned about Indigenous sovereignty. I learned about our unique rights as Indigenous people, and I learned about our tribal constitution. It was at that time that I knew I wanted to serve my people, that I wanted to better our governance system. It is now time to rebuild the lodge. Not just an individual lodge, but the lodge of our society. It's time to rebuild Turtle Mountain. It's time to rebuild our traditional governance systems. It's time for unity, transparency, and accountability. And most of all, it's time for reform. She miigwech.
So I just want to, if you could all welcome Jair Peltier.
Thank you. All right. Everybody hear me okay? All right. Bonjour Anine. Jair Peltier Indishnakas, Makwadodem Nindao, Mekanakwajun Dunjaba. My name is Jair Peltier of the Bear Clan of the Anishinaabe, and Turtle Mountain is my homeland. I'm here today to share with you my vision for Turtle Mountain. I am running for chairman of Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa, and I am running on what I call a trust platform. T.R.U.S.T. Tradition, reform, unity, stability, and transparency. So first of all, tradition. So what does it mean when I say tradition is a top priority of my campaign? For many, many years, the federal government suppressed traditional Indigenous knowledge. They took children away from their homes, they sent them to boarding schools, and they raised them to be assimilated American citizens, to forget who they are. Today we have a lot of problems with drug abuse, with homelessness, with self-esteem. And all of it goes back, I believe, to the fact that our people do not know who they are. Our young people have forgotten who they are. So it's important that we take these traditions that we have, that have been kept by knowledge keepers, by traditional headmen and matriarchs from Turtle Mountain, and bring that into the curricula at our schools. At Turtle Mountain, we have about 4 schools. We have federally funded schools, we have tribal schools that are part of the state system, and we also have Catholic schools. So what we need to do is we need to bring tradition to all forms of education. A lot of times people talk about, when they talk about indigenous movements, we talk about decolonizing. Decolonization is an important aspect. That's important, but I also believe that we need to re-indigenize. It's not enough to decolonize, but we need to re-indigenize. So at all levels of education. I did not learn about tribal sovereignty or our tribal constitution until I was in college. It took me going to Turtle Mountain Community College to learn about these fundamental things about our tribal nation, our relationship with the United States, our historical relationships with France, the United Kingdom, and other tribes, the Three Fires Confederacy, and all the various tribes that are all across North Dakota today. But it took me going to college, and I think what we need to do is we need to make sure that from a very early age, our children are learning our traditional language, our traditional customs, and our history. So that means, bringing in people who speak Anishinaabe, people who know the traditional customs and norms and histories, and bringing them into the preschools, making sure that the children are learning from a very early age, having immersion programs so that kids that are born at Turtle Mountain, that are raised at Turtle Mountain, will have at least a very basic understanding of the Anishinaabe language, Anishinaabe-Mawin. With this also comes traditional industries. Historically, our people, were hunter-gatherers. We had certain seasons for certain berries, certain seasons for the different plants and the roots and the medicines. And we need to revive those because our people are sick. It's not just a physical sickness, it's a mental sickness, it's an emotional sickness. And by restoring our traditional industries, we're going to give people purpose, something to do and something to cling to. And on top of this, the thing that will bind it all together is reestablishing our traditional governance systems. The government system that we have at Turtle Mountain today has only existed for about 80 years, not even 100 years. It was imposed on us by what was known as the Indian Reorganization Act. The Indian Reorganization Act told tribes that you have to adopt Western-style systems of government. So no more chiefs, no more headmen, no more matriarchs. You have to have a democratically elected government. And I believe that that's a good thing. I don't necessarily disagree with democracy. But by that same token, we lost our connection to our traditional governance systems. So what I propose is that in tandem with the civic government, which is what I will be a part of, we will also have the traditional governance systems to check the power of the civic government. Anytime that our government makes an official act, makes a law, makes a policy, it should have to go through a traditional governance council. People who are appointed by these chiefs, by these headmen, by these matriarchs, our clan mothers. They should be able to nullify anything that goes against our values as Indigenous people. Indigenous people, we have the right to self-determination. In the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, it says that all Indigenous nations have the right to self-determination. And that should include how we identify our political leaders and how we operate our governance systems. So that's tradition. That is the goal. It's the thing that ties all things together. It's our traditions, it's our culture, it's our customs. If we do not maintain our cultural distinction, then we will lose our claims to sovereignty. In order to claim sovereignty, you have to prove that you're different. You're different than other people. You're a distinct cultural group. And if we lose our traditions, if we lose our culture, then we lose our sovereignty. And that really was the intent, as I was saying, the intent of the federal government in suppressing our traditions and our customs and our language. Because if we can't say we're different, if we cannot say that we're a distinct group, then we're left to the wind, to the will of the federal government. Reform. As I just previously mentioned, the Indian Reorganization Act imposed boilerplate constitutions onto our tribes. So there was a report that was done in 1928. It was known as the Miriam Report under the Roosevelt administration. And basically this guy went to different tribes. He was a representative of the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And he said, there's so much poverty in Indian country. All these tribes are poor and they're desolate. It's not because the federal government did that to them. It's not because the federal government put us on reservations and suppressed our people for many, many years. He said it was because they have poor governance structures. They don't have Western-style governments. And so when the Indian Reorganization Act was passed in 1934, basically the federal government sent out boilerplate constitutions to all the tribes, saying, insert your name at the top, you'll have a Western-style government, and then you'll be prosperous, like the rest of American society. In so doing, we've created a government that was not well thought out, that was not well planned. We have, the way that the tribal government works at Turtle Mountain is we have 8 tribal council members and 1 chairman or chairperson. We do not have a separation of the executive power and the legislative power. Essentially, what this has done is we have created a government that is leading by committee. And if anybody knows anything about Soviet Russia or communist China, that's exactly how they do it. They lead by committee. You have a small group of people who make the decisions for everybody. That's what we have at Turtle Mountain. We do not have a way of negotiating between how the money is spent and then how it's executed by the executive. So part of my reform proposals for Turtle Mountain include establishing a clearly defined executive branch that would have negotiation power with the tribal council, which would take over the legislative responsibilities of the tribe. Because they're united right now, because we have this tribal council system, we have no real way of negotiating. Basically, what we have is, hey, if this council member does something for me, then I'll do something for him down the road. As opposed to saying, we just passed a law, now we're going to pass it to the executive, who we have to show a justified process, a fair and open process. So separation of powers and checks and balances. Right now, the tribal government makes all the employment decisions. And actually, in the last few years, if you look at Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa's website, the government website, you'll see that over the last 4 or 6 years, the tribal council has been busy consolidating business powers. Basically, there's no independent business anymore. Any business decision goes through the tribal government. And all employment decisions, people who are hired to work for the tribe, go through the tribal council. So you have politically elected positions that are making business decisions, that are making employment decisions, hiring decisions. And that leads to a culture of anxiety. I've talked to many tribal workers, people who have left, who say that they're all afraid. There is this culture of fear. Because if you speak out against the tribal government, if you speak out against the tribal council, you run the risk of getting fired. You run the risk of losing your livelihood, of losing your job. And so by separating those things, by separating business powers, by separating hiring powers from the politically elected government, we will ensure that there's a more fair and open process in hiring and in business ventures. Unity. This is my favorite bit right here. This is probably one of the boldest proposals that has been made at Turtle Mountain in a long time, in decades, which is the elimination of blood quantum. So what is blood quantum? Blood quantum is a colonial construct that was imposed upon tribes in the colonial period. There were 2 ways of measuring identity in the colonial period.
They had 1 drop for Africans, and they had blood quantum for indigenous Americans. 1 drop rule means if you have 1 drop of African blood, if you have 1 African ancestor, then you are black and you are a slave. 3/5 a person. And with blood quantum, if you have your blood, your identity gets divided with every passing generation. If you have 1 white ancestor or 1 white parent, then you're less indigenous. So in a way, these 2 concepts are actually contradicting. You know, in one sense, African blood infects you as a black person, but in the other sense, as an indigenous person, whiteness infects you. You become less indigenous. It's true. And it was all with the intention of 2 purposes. With the 1 drop rule, you increase the amount of people that give you free labor. And with blood quantum, you reduce the amount of people who have claims to the land that they occupy. If you can go to them and say you aren't Indian enough, then that justifies the federal government taking everything that you have. So this is a question I ask everybody back home. Why do we have that system embedded within our tribal constitution? And again, this all goes back to the Indian Reorganization Act, the IRA. It's because when they put out those boilerplate constitutions, they included blood quantum as a measurement. And so to this day, in order to identify your blood quantum, your blood pedigree, which is as racist as it sounds, you have to go to the rolls that were established in the 1940s and trace your lineage that way. And then you get a percentage. And in order to be a tribal member, you have to have at least 25%, a quarter. Historically, however, we didn't do things that way. We were not geneticists before the colonization of America. We had complex systems of adoption, and we identified people by lineal descent. Meaning, my grandmother, my mother are from Turtle Mountain, therefore I'm from Turtle Mountain. My father's from Turtle Mountain, therefore I'm from Turtle Mountain. It doesn't matter the blood pedigree, because again, the blood pedigree is a racist system. It was a racialized system that was imposed on us. And so what I am proposing is that in order to remain united as a tribal nation, as a sovereign nation, we have to make sure that our people are all accounted for. And we have to make sure that our children have a home to come back to. Because this is the issue, today especially. I would say now more than ever. We have more and more mixed people. And I tell you what, you have people at Turtle Mountain who have lived there their whole lives. Their parents are both from Turtle Mountain. But because they fell in love with somebody who's not from Turtle Mountain, their children are barred from being enrolled because of their blood quantum. This goes, we have people from all over. And actually, Turtle Mountain historically was always a very diverse place because it was such a central location on the plains that you had Ojibwe people there, you had Nakota people there, or Assiniboine, you had Lakota people, you had Métis people, you had the French, and eventually the Scottish and the English came through there. So already, you go back 200 years, it was already a diverse place. It wasn't like we were all one thing. So it goes against kind of our fundamental identity as Turtle Mountain people, which is that we are a diverse people already. And also, they had a complex system of adoption. What does that mean? The system of adoption literally meant, historically our people, indigenous people in North America, they didn't do war in the way that people do war today. A lot of times they had what was called counting coup. And if you got close enough to a warrior to touch him, then they were dishonored, they were disgraced. You let somebody touch you with the coup stick, and you were taken as a prisoner of war. Because you wouldn't even want to go back home after that. And we had prisoners of war who would, essentially be indentured servants. But after living in the tribe for a number of years, they would be fully adopted into the tribe. Once you learn the language, once you learn the customs, once you learn the way of living, who can say that you're not from the tribe? And then you would take on a wife, you would be blended into the society, and you would be a full citizen. And every country in the world today has a naturalization process that does not include blood pedigree or blood quantum. As a sovereign nation, and this is in the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, we have the right to self-identification. We set our own laws, our own rules on how to identify our people. And I think that we should get to the point where somebody who is fully invested in the tribe wants to give their time, talent, and resources to the tribe, wants to learn our language, preserve our customs, carry it on for the next generation, should be allowed to become citizens of our nation. Just like every country in the world. If I wanted to, tomorrow I could move to France and I could live there for 10 years, learn French, learn how to, smoke cigarettes for breakfast. If I learned their cultural customs and the way that they live, I could become a French citizen. So why isn't that the way it is at Turtle Mountain or anywhere in Indian country for that regard? But I do understand that there are some people who still really believe in blood quantum at our tribe, who wouldn't necessarily want it to go away completely. But there are some precedents for at least fixing the system. So if we don't get enough popular support to completely eliminate blood quantum, I say at the very least we should reform it. And if you look at what they did at White Earth and Red Lake Nation in Minnesota, they reset their blood quantum rolls to 1980. So anyone born before 1980 is considered a full-blooded citizen. And then they trace that the blood quantum from that. So I personally want to abolish blood quantum completely because I believe it's antithetical to indigenous teachings and to how we identify our members, the spirit of adoption. But I also understand that some people might not be fully on board with that, and so at the very least, I'm willing to compromise on that to reset our blood quantum requirements to 1980, just like they did at White Earth. This also means international outreach as well. As a sovereign nation, we should be able to go to other countries and to request assistance, to get foreign investment, to get recognition. Because as it stands, Anishinaabe people had treaties with the English. We had unwritten treaties with the French. There's even evidence that the Holy See, the Vatican, made a treaty, a wampum belt treaty, with Indigenous people in Canada. So we know that the sovereignty of Indigenous people has been recognized internationally for centuries, since the 1600s. So why is it that we're limited? Essentially, tribes are not allowed to go beyond the federal government. The federal government retains exclusive rights to deal with the tribal nations, to manage them, and to make relationships with them. But as I said, that goes against the history of our recognitions from other countries. And so not only reaching out to other tribes, like in North Dakota, we have 5 tribes, 4 aside from Turtle Mountain. We should be reaching out to them to stand united. American Indian people, Native Americans, we only make up about 3% of the population of the United States of America. So we have to stand together as much as possible if we're going to ever accomplish anything. It's like Sitting Bull said, and I'm a descendant of Sitting Bull. He's one of my great-great-great-grandfathers through my MacArthur family side. And he said, as individual fingers, we are easily broken, but together we form a mighty fist. And that's exactly what we need today. We need to stand united as Indigenous people, not only in North Dakota, not only in the United States, not only in North America, but truly worldwide. There are indigenous people all over this world. There's indigenous people in Australia, in Scandinavia, in Africa, in South America. We have to reach out to them and unite the indigenous world in order to get the things that we need. Not only the preservation of our sovereignty, our right to self-determination, but also the economic opportunities that we need to build ourselves up. Which brings me to stability. As I mentioned at Turtle Mountain, there really isn't a clear distinction between business powers and political power. The political government, the civic government, has really taken control and has been the one to choose winners and losers in our economy. And so what we need to do is we need to separate those business powers from the tribal government. And the way that I see that happening is through the establishment of an independent economic development corporation. And you see this a lot in rural America. There are municipal governments that will establish economic development corporations. And cooperatives, yes, co-ops. And I think, and actually it's interesting that you mentioned that. Cooperatives, I think, are a wonderful way to boost economic activity in Indian country, because we were already a communal people. And a cooperative business model really represents, I think, that communal way forward, the way that we were a communal people. So it's a way of honoring our past with an eye towards the future. And actually, if you look at the statistics on cooperatives, cooperative business models actually have a higher success rate in the United States than conventional business models. A conventional business has a 5-year survival rate of like 5 to 10%. But a cooperative model has a 5-year survival rate of about 60% or 70%. So when you actually look at the numbers on cooperatives are a good way to go. So thank you for mentioning that. But by establishing this economic development corporation, we'll be separating our business powers from politics. Imagine if Congress was the one to decide the business decisions of America. Imagine if Congress was the one who was hiring everyone who worked in the federal government. It would be kind of a mess, wouldn't it? But that's what's happening at Turtle Mountain. This Economic Development Corporation would be a way of managing our tribe's money without the possibility of corruption. Well, I mean, there's always a possibility. Humans tend towards corruption, but at least there'll be accountability. There would actually be a way of checking to see that those business opportunities are being invested in properly. Our money is being handled properly. And I mentioned the Dawes Act here. The Dawes Act, or the Indian Appropriations Act, basically this was when all of tribal land was turned into allotments and then given to families. But the thing about it is, every generation that passes, the land gets fractionalized. So, our great-grandfather had a parcel of land, and when he died, his 3 children divided the land 3 ways, and then they died, and then the land was divided even more. And to this day, we have all of these small, tiny parcels of land. And I would say this is one of our biggest barriers to development. It all stems from the Dawes Act and dividing up the lands in that way. And as the lands become fractionalized, some people have sold their allotments. Some people sold them to non-Indian people. And when you sell tribal land to a non-Indian person, that gets taken out of the federal trust. And so then that leads to other problems jurisdictionally, because then you have a checkerboard effect. Some of this land is tribal, some of it's private, some of it's state maybe. And this causes problems for jurisdictions and zoning. We are unable to give proper zoning permits to figure out how to zone, how to give certain industries preference because of this fractionated land that we have in Indian country. And so bringing stability to the economy is really important for Indian country. And if we really don't start to reconsider our land allotment system, we're never going to overcome that barrier. But this also includes foreign investment. I was just saying to an individual out here that I often say that In Indian country, we have a tendency to treat our issues as domestic issues. And so we seek domestic solutions to those issues. But if we are a sovereign nation, if we are truly a sovereign nation within the anarchy of international affairs, then we have to treat our issues as international issues. And we have to find international solutions to those problems. Because once you start to apply international language, the picture becomes much clearer. We have a trade deficit in Indian country. We take in, resources from outside, but we don't produce anything internally, and we don't take things to market. We don't have foreign direct investment. We don't have people from other countries or from other tribes coming into our communities and investing. I have no problem with foreign investors making money so long as they provide the economic opportunities for our people to grow and take care of themselves. So opening ourselves up to the rest of the world is really important, because for so many years we've been isolated, we've been cut off from the rest of the world, and we've been left to fight among ourselves, to fight over land, to fight over resources, instead of finding a better strategic plan, a way of creating a united front and seeking those economic opportunities. And just like rebuilding those traditional industries, it goes a long way. Because we'll be able to produce things that we historically produced. Our people have always been good artists. We've always had, good food systems. We've always been industrial people. We are the one, the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa, we're the ones who invented the Red River cart. So what happened to that industry? Taking our things to market and those kinds of things. So I think that by opening ourselves up economically to the rest of the world, we'll have more stability. Because unfortunately, what we have right now in Turtle Mountain is we have a boom and bust kind of cycles. We get money from the federal government, we get a grant written maybe, we get that funding, then the grant runs out, then the program fails, then the money runs out. Especially right now, there's a lot of money being thrown around at Turtle Mountain. $32 million from the federal government is unaccounted for at Turtle Mountain right now, because of the way that our tribe operates, their business structures. And they've thrown money at various pet projects that are not really designed to help the people, but rather make money for them and their family members. And so by bringing in economic opportunity and create more stability, we lose that, we move more away from that boom and bust kind of system. I'm not saying that we shouldn't get any money from the federal government, because we have treaties. We have treaties and agreements with the federal government, and the federal government has to fulfill its obligation. So any money from the federal government is supposed to fulfill their obligation to provide us with health care, to provide us with education, to provide for our well-being. But by that same token, if we're totally reliant on the federal government, what's going to happen to us? I always say a government that is strong enough to give you everything is strong enough to take it all away. So we have to really be considerate about where our money is coming from. And if our money is only coming from the federal government, it's going to be bad for the future generations. And that brings me to transparency, of course. As I mentioned, $32 million is missing at Turtle Mountain. During COVID, we got a lot of money, and this money was supposed to be spent on direct payments to members, because Turtle Mountain has the most enrolled members than any other tribe in North Dakota. We have about 32,000 enrolled members, maybe more, after this last census. But because we have such a high number, we got a lot of money. All the other tribes, in North Dakota, like the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara, and the Spirit Lake Nation, they all did direct payments to their members, because they got about 8,000, 10,000 members. They got a few $1 million. They gave it all to their members. Everyone was supposed to get about $6,000, I think was the measurement. But at Turtle Mountain, They decided instead of giving money directly to members, they were going to pool all the money and spend it any which way that they wanted. They started throwing money around. They started a butcher shop that didn't actually turn into a butcher shop. Now it's like office space for the USDA. They threw money at a water park, which went $10 million over budget. We had, isn't it crazy? We have an emergency response center that was built using our money. We built an emergency response center that is on non-tribal land. So we have a tribally funded building that we have to pay fees on land that we have to pay fees on. Oh my gosh, I could go on. There's so many things like that. That emergency response center, when it was first built, it wasn't even built to code. You couldn't put the emergency response vehicles inside. The butcher shop, the reason that the butcher shop fell through is because they had it by a sewer line. You can't have butchery in a place where there's sewage. So there were a lot of miscalculations. And I think a lot of it stems from the fact that it's a closed off system. They don't talk, they don't have this open accountability. Whose fault is it? We can't say because there is no transparency. We can't say if it was the fault of the tribal chairman or if it was the fault of an individual tribal council member or if it was maybe the private side of it, the people who were constructing. There's no transparency. And a lot of the companies that came in, just as a side note, a lot of the companies that came in to build these buildings were from Minnesota. They weren't even locals. And our current tribal chairman has a lot of business relationships in the state of Minnesota because that's where he got his business degree. I'm not claiming to know anything, secret knowledge, but there's definitely something that's very suspicious going on at Turtle Mountain as far as that money goes. But the federal government did do an audit and they wrote a report, and you can find this report, the Office of Inspector General website, that $32 million was misspent at Turtle Mountain. And that's just from the COVID funding. That's not even including other kinds of funding that has happened in that time. I did hear from kind of a secret informant who works in the tribal government. He said that there's going to be a full audit done by the federal government in December. But of course, the election will be before that. So if, stuff hits the fan, it will be after they get reelected, if they get reelected. And so what I propose that we do is that we bring in an independent third-party auditor to look over our finances. That is, if the federal government isn't already doing that. And producing regular reports on our tribal financing that will be freely open and available for all tribal members. Every tribal member should really be seen as a shareholder in our tribal government, in our business, in our finances. And as shareholders, they are supposed to be entitled to how things are being managed, how things are being operated. So I propose regular reporting on financing for our people to view. And also having clear and open hiring processes that are not tied into politics at all. The federal government, they have they have a separate office of employment that manages the employment opportunities for federal jobs, completely separate completely separated from politics. There was one thing that I wanted to mention that I forgot to mention. The reason that the tribe felt comfortable pooling all that money together instead of doing direct payments is because most of our people do not have a home at Turtle Mountain. Most of our people live away. So we have 32,000 members, but only about 8,000 or 9,000 of them live in and around the reservation. There isn't enough housing. There's not enough housing, and there's not enough job opportunities. And so because all those tribal members live off reservation, they are completely forgotten. The tribe does not consider them when they figure all these things, when they factor all these things. They just don't, they don't consider the thousands, the tens of thousands of people that live in Minneapolis, Seattle, San Francisco, and all over the state of North Dakota. And that all goes back to the 1950s and 60s. The federal government gave tribal communities money to move away from the reservations to get factory jobs in the cities. So they built housing projects and that kind of stuff. And again, it was a tool of assimilation. They wanted the people to leave the reservation. And it seemed like a good deal, right? We're going to go get economic opportunities in the city. But it was with the underlying motive that they would become Americans. Anytime the federal government tries to get rid of Native people or move them away or assimilate them, it's all for the same reason, to abolish the tribal system. Because the tribal system, recognizing the sovereignty of indigenous people, it's expensive. It's an expensive system to maintain. But it's what we need, because by agreeing to these systems, by agreeing to the reservation system, by signing treaties with the federal government, we freed up so much land for the American government to make money. Think about all the tribal land that was taken that produces hundreds of millions of dollars every year for the American economy that we have been shut out from. So when people talk about, oh, the tribal system is expensive, believe me, it was a lot more expensive for us to give up that land in the first place. Because you promised, and again, treaties are supposed to be the supreme law of the land, right? In the U.S. Constitution, Article 5, treaties are the supreme law of the land in this country. If you don't fulfill the treaty obligations, you're breaking constitutional law. And so transparency is a really important goal for me, so that the tribal government can never be as corrupt as it is right now. That never again will we have to question or have to wonder if our money is being spent properly. So you can learn more about my platform. I have it all written down on jairforchair.com, JAIR, the number 4, chair.com. I got all of this on there. Everything should be up there. But we also have a donor box site for donations. That's donorbox.com/JairTheBearForChair. That's the QR code for the donor box site if anybody wants to take a look. If you want to be a part of this movement, if you want to see change at Turtle Mountain that would hopefully inspire other tribes to follow the same kinds of reforms, feel free to donate, a few dollars. If everybody donated, $5, I think we'd be sitting pretty good. October 1st is the Tribal Forum. That's kind of our version of the debates. October 15th is the primary. And November, whenever the federal and state election is, that's when our tribal general election is. But I have to get through to October 15th because it's the top 2 that go on to the general election, the top 2 candidates. So I have to make sure that I get there. And I have to be visible. I have to make sure that I'm visible to the people, that where the people's eyeballs are, there's Jair the Bear. So any donations that are made will go towards online advertising, physical print media, billboards, that kind of thing. Because it's we're in the home stretch. We're coming towards the election very fast. And so anything would be greatly appreciated. So Chi Miigwech, thank you very much. And remember, tell your friends and relatives at Turtle Mountain, Jair the Bear for Chair. Thank you very much. Thank you.